Welcome back to the podcast on the Ten Commandments, the laws of liberation. Okay, let's get into the second commandment, which begins by saying, "You shall not make for yourself a graven image." I have to admit, my world was rocked when studying this commandment. I used to always think that it was about not making statues of other gods, but in fact, even though it could mean that, many folks argue that it probably outlawed making a statue of God and using it in worship. Significantly, the commandment says, "You shall not make for yourself a graven image," hinting that it may have been a tempting form of self-help for worshipers to try to make worship easier for themselves by carving an image that they could center their worship around. This was a common practice among Israel's neighbors, who placed statues of their gods in their temples and probably in their homes. It's tempting sometimes to treat God like a graven image, who we can manipulate to do our will. But Almighty God is committed to an authentic relationship with us, a relationship of trust, not of manipulation. God refuses to be located, domesticated, controlled in a physical object. The God who freed the children of Israel from slavery refuses to be enslaved in a graven image. The God who created the cosmos refuses to be worshipped as a statue created by human hands. When worshipers bow down to an image that they have created, they are merely worshiping themselves. The children of Israel definitely needed this commandment, because right when Moses was on his way to deliver it to them, they were busy worshiping a golden calf, which was the symbol of the Canaanite fertility god, Baal, which you may have heard pronounced Baal. Talk about a holy cow! Moses was horrified when he found the children of Israel worshiping the graven image of a calf, and he responded by becoming the first person to break the commandments. He smashed them to pieces. I was surprised last year when I visited the temple of Ramesses III at Karnak, Egypt, to learn that there used to be an image of God in the form of a golden statue in that temple's Holy of Holies, and that the high priest entered the Holy of Holies 3 times a day in order to take care of the image. First at dawn, in order to take the image out of the tabernacle, place it on the altar, and make an offering to it. Then at noon, to give the image a bath. And finally at sunset, to put the image back in the tabernacle for the night. On the other hand, there was no image of God in the form of a golden statue in the Holy of Holies in Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, since the priestly authors who wrote about the design of the tabernacle and the rituals that were performed in it also wrote in Genesis 1 that God created humankind in the image of God. So the only image of God ever to enter the Holy of Holies in Solomon's temple was the high priest, not a statue. Instead of creating an image of God, we are created to be the image of God. How cool is that? But what does it mean to be the image of God? I used to always think of the image of God like Calvin does in a Calvin and Hobbes comic strip. He's flexing in the mirror and says, "Made in God's own image, yes sir." Hobbes responds, "God must have a goofy sense of humor." While we often think of the term image of God, like Calvin did, as a reflection in the mirror, the term image of God also has other meanings in the ancient Near Eastern world. Mesopotamian texts describe the king as the image of a god, to designate the king as a special representative of the god or gods, possessing a divine authority to rule and the power to do so. Think of that. You're created as the king and queens of God's estate, God's royal representative, God's image on earth. While most of us aren't tempted to run out and carve a statue of God to worship, the ideas in this commandment are powerfully relevant today. This commandment warns us not to make and worship a symbol rather than the real deal. Not to let our prayer and worship become so stagnant and routine that they fail to do honor to God's awesome majesty. Not to water down our relationship with God in an attempt to make it easier. And not to place too much weight on anything, however good, if it is not God. This commandment encourages us to let God use us to serve God's will, rather than trying to use God to serve our will. And most importantly, it encourages us to live up to our identity as the image of God. The Bible resources that I quoted in this podcast are listed on the Sunday School section of the tmcyouth.com website.
This podcast is produced and copyrighted by the First Church of Christ Scientists in Boston.